In this tutorial, I'll show you how to design an icon library using a grid in Adobe Illustrator. I'm going to design 3 icons that signify creativity using this icon grid. You can download these practice files and the icon grid that I used today in the description below. So before I start any kind of icon project, I like to look around at different icon styles that I might want to try in my design. Especially with an icon library, design consistency across your set of icons is crucial. Really understanding the style that you're going after ahead of time will save you a lot of time in the design process. I like to use sites like Dribbble and Pinterest and Behance to kind of look at lots of different icon designs that I might want to try. For today's tutorial, I'm going to do more of a filled design icon look, so something along the lines of this. And when I say filled, it is filled with a color as opposed to an outline icon that just has lines in it. So let's go to Pinterest and find some icons as well. Yeah, these are nice. And I'd like to find some other filled icons just to have on my screen next to me while I'm designing. So here's a few as well. Something I like about all 3 of these is they have lots of rounded corners in them. This one also has some hard edges as well. So like a mix of rounded corners and hard edges. So just kind of noticing some of the details of these icons that I like. This one also has rounded corners. That's kind of cool. And so does this one. This one also, some of the lines that are in here also have rounded corners. That's probably where I'm going to head with my design, is maybe have filled shapes with rounded corners. Instead of starting from scratch and just going straight to Illustrator, I'm going to see what icons already exist out in the world that fit the designs that I'm going for. 2 sites that I really like to use for this, fonts.google.com. They don't just have fonts, they also have icons. So on the left, you can go to the icons. You can search all of the Google font library. I'm gonna do a search for 3 of the icons that I think I'm going to use. I think I'm gonna use a paintbrush to kind of signify art. And if you click it on the right, you can download an SVG or a PNG. We want SVG. SVG is a vector format, and I'll be able to pull this into Illustrator and play with the shapes of this icon. So I'm gonna download the SVG. I like this art palette. I think I'm gonna use this one too. Download the SVG of that one. I'm also gonna do a camera. Okay, so those are 3 directly from Google Fonts. On the left, you can change out the Google font weights and fills. I wanted filled icons, so I had this selected. Another great site that you can download free icons is Font Awesome. They have some free icons, they have some paid icons. I'm gonna see what they have for free for the 3 icons that I'm looking for. So I'm just gonna type paint. So they have an artist palette. They have one with rounded corners. That's pretty cool. So I'm gonna download this. They have a paintbrush. I'm sure they have a camera. Yep, here's a camera. Another great place to look for icons is the Noun Project. And this one has lots of more detailed icons as well. So just a quick search on this site. Let's see what we come up with. Paint. Okay, yeah, lots of different paintbrushes, different styles, different weights. See, there's a lot more details in here. I think if you sign up for a free account, you can download a vector format of any of these icons. But we already have a few that I can start with, so I'm just gonna start with those. Now let me pop over to Adobe Illustrator. In front of you, you see an icon grid. I downloaded this icon grid from Google. Google provides their icon grid for free. If all of your icons are designed on the same grid at the same size, same scale, then they are going to look more consistent across the board at various sizes. So that's why you want to use a grid, especially for an icon library project like this one. So you're looking at a 24 pixel icon grid. And then in the center here, we have some various shapes. I'm gonna turn the fill off on this. We have a circle right there. We have a horizontal rectangle. We have a vertical rectangle, and we have a square. So really any shape icon that you can come up with, we want it to fit somewhere inside of these, what are called the key shapes inside of this design. And we always want to have 2 pixels of padding around the edge. I'm not going to let any design elements move into this 2 pixel area at the edge. That just gives my icon a little bit of padding around it, and all my icons will have the same padding for consistency. All right, so now that I have my grid open, I'm going to add another artboard. I'm gonna pull in those icons that I downloaded. And now I'm just gonna pull my grid over. By the way, I like to put my icon grid on a separate layer and call it grid. And then put all of the icons on their own layer too. called icons. That way your grid's not moving around a lot. I'd like to show you how this grid works. So I'm going to take one of these existing icons that I downloaded. I'm just going to line it up as best I can with my grid. So again, we will always want to keep this 2 pixel padding around the edge at a minimum. I think the rectangle shape in the key shapes inside of this grid, this kind of fits this camera shape the best. I've used these shapes in my grid to place the icon. I'm going to delete that one. And let's actually start drawing our camera. I'm just gonna have these next to me for reference because I want to do my own kind of custom one, but you could always take one of these existing icons and just modify it. That is completely fine. These are free to download and free to use on projects. I'm gonna start with a rectangle and go about there. I'm also gonna do the top of this camera. Kind of want mine a little more square like this. These have a slight angle on the side, both of them, but let's see how this looks at first. So this fits perfectly in my rectangle. You can see that key shape behind here. And now I'm going to round the corners. I want my rounded corners to be as consistent as possible, but let's just kind of play with it. You can drag the rounded corners by clicking on your shape with the white arrow and going to an edge and holding down Shift and drag it. Or you can also type in your corner radius at the top up here. And let's do the same for this. I'm gonna do a 2 pixel corner radius. And then I have my actual camera lens in the middle. I wanna make sure this is centered. So go to my shape tool and draw a circle. And I'm gonna have it line up with these lines right here. I also like to make sure that I'm using pretty exact measurements if possible. The properties panel in Adobe Illustrator, you can see exactly what the size of the shape is. This circle is selected and it says it's 8 points or 8 pixels. You don't really want it to be 8.123. I like to have rounded numbers if possible. And that's kind of like a cleanup thing you can do at the end as well. We've got 2 different styles here. We've got a circle, and then this one has a circle and then another circle inside of it. I kind of like the look of the 2 circles. So in that case, I'm actually going to add a stroke to this circle instead. And maybe make it a little smaller. I'm going to go over here and maybe say 7.25. And then I'd like to make sure this is centered. So I'm going to use my align tool. What is this stroke? It is a 1-point stroke. I may want this stroke to be a little thicker in my design, 1 or 2. This is kind of a design decision because you want to make sure the stroke that you're using on your designs is consistent across all of your icons. So in my set, this has some negative space or like a stroke. The space between my paintbrush has this line right here. So that's kind of negative space or stroke. So those are 2 things that I'd like to be consistent. Let's try 1.5. I think 1 is too light and 2 is too heavy. So far, I think that looks good. Let's move on to another icon. Let's do the paint palette next. So I'm just gonna unlock this grid layer and lock it again. And I'm gonna do the same exercise I did a minute ago, just to kind of see how these existing icons fit on this grid and what shapes are they using. This is using a circle as the base shape, and they've kind of used a little cutout to make the artist palette. This one doesn't quite look like a circle, looks a little different. I think using a circle as a base is a smart move. And honestly, I think this might be kind of hard to draw doing this shape. So I'm gonna use this existing design and just modify it a little bit. One thing I might wanna change is the size of these. So these little guys are 2.5 pixels wide. What if I made each of these a little bit bigger? So I made it 3. And I'm making these changes in my properties panel. Okay, let's try this one. Okay, this looks pretty good. You know, you could come in here and could adjust this just a little bit more if I wanted to make it a little more inset. Honestly, I'm just gonna leave it where it is. One call out I wanna make, so remember we used a stroke here and we have this negative space. This doesn't necessarily have negative space, but we do have this space between like a circle and the edge of our shape and then the space between the circles. So I kind of like to measure these things and just make sure everything is feeling similar. So I'm just gonna make a little spacer box at 1.5 because that's the stroke we used a minute ago. I like to make this a funny color, like a hot pink. Just kind of see how far apart these elements are. So this is probably close to 2. These are kind of far apart. It's close to 2. I don't think I'm going to worry too much about this right now, but you see what I'm doing here and using this little shape as a measurement tool. Getting in here and just measuring the spaces in my icons is something that you'll want to do, especially towards the end of the icon design and when you're cleaning things up, just to make sure it feels consistent. Let's do this last one. I'm going to do the same exercise I showed you earlier. I just want to see like how these are fitting on the grid. So let's pull this over. You can either have this fit inside the circle, but that might be a little small. If you're looking at this right next to something that is filling like the whole space up here, I think it might feel a little small next to that. So I'm going to use kind of the edge of this square key shape as my line. I don't really love the shape of either of these, so I'm going to make something new. I'm going to use a rectangle and let's turn it. I'm going to use the same overall slanted concept. I do like the tip of this. I am gonna bring this in here. I do like this paintbrush okay, but I want this tip to be bigger. I also want to change the radius of this handle. Brought it over here. I'm just gonna try something. I made this little box, this little shape that fits our stroke weight that we had above. It's 1.5 high. And I'm going to use it as like a separation element for the negative space between these two shapes. So I'm going to just put it here and I'm going to make it white. I can turn my grid off and just zoom out and see if this is any good. It's okay. I might just kind of move this around a little bit more, maybe reduce the size just a hair. And let's look at it again. So this is using my same corner radius of 2. All right, so I'm just gonna move these extra icons kind of to the side. And also want all these to be, we'll make them all black so we can look at them as a set. I'm gonna turn my grids off. Let's look at these designs all together. Just a call out, remember we're using about a 2 pixel radius around the edge. I still think this paintbrush looks a little bit small, and it might be because the corner is not going to that 2 pixel line here. Okay, I'm just gonna move these next to each other as well and just look at them in a row and make sure they feel cohesive, like they can work in a set. Just zoom in. And these do feel good as a set. You know, they are different shapes, so it's not always going to be apples to apples when it comes to volume and size, but that is definitely okay in an icon set. You're just gonna have some that are smaller and have less mass and volume. Now that we're happy with the icons and the design, there's a couple finishing touches that I need to do to make sure that they are actually ready to go as icons. And what I'm referring to, this design was built with multiple shapes. We need to simplify this and combine and remove shapes where necessary. So we're going to do a few things here. First, we're going to combine all of these background shapes. And there's a great tool we can use called the Shape Builder tool in our left toolbar. So first you have to select everything that you want to combine. So I'm combining this shape and this top camera shape. And then if I go to my shape builder, I can just hover and click and drag over the shapes I want to combine. So this is now one shape. Now I still have this circle in the front that I need to combine into this. This is still a stroke and this is a filled circle and it's separate from this background. I'm going to outline the stroke so we no longer have a stroke here. You don't want any strokes in final icons because if you're scaling those icons, the strokes may or may not scale with it and could affect the look of your design. So I'm going to go to Object, Path, Outline Stroke. So this is no longer a stroke. And then last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to select this shape and the background shape. And we're going to use the pathfinder. And we're going to essentially cut out this shape from our background shape. So with all of these selected using the pathfinder, I'm going to use the divide tool. And then I'm going to delete this white shape here. Okay, that was a little weird. Essentially, it cut out the shape that was behind it with the shape on top. And then I got rid of it behind. So this is all now one shape. It's always a good idea to click on this and make sure it's all in the same group. And if it's not, you can select the shapes and say Object, Group. All right, let's go to the next one. I don't think there's really anything much to do here. We didn't make a lot of changes to this one. These shapes are already cut out of the background and this is on our grid. This looks great and it's all one color. All right, this is made up of multiple colors and multiple shapes. Just like we did a second ago, I'm going to use the pathfinder again because we need to cut some of these shapes out. I need to use this shape that's on top to cut the back, to cut the handle and the actual brush. So I'm going to select all three. And And I'm gonna use this divide tool. And then using my white arrow, I'm gonna get in here and there's lots of little white shapes that I have now created. Just zoom in here, make sure I got them all. Okay, this looks good. And this is already grouped, so that's good. One last step that I always like to do, especially if you're using pathfinders and cutting things out, you wanna turn your grid off, then zoom out. And then you wanna go Command Y and just zoom in and make sure there's no like extra floating objects. This allows you to just see the outlines of your shapes. If you have cut out some things, there could be some artifacts or little baby shapes still lingering in here, and you definitely don't want that. So I like to scroll through and just make sure all the weird shapes are taken care of. And again, that's Command Y, turns on the outlines. So these three icons are good to go. They're ready to export. One other thing we could do, if you wanted multiple styles of icons, let's say you wanted a filled and an outline, you could come into your icons that you created and create an outline version as well of all of these. So all I did was select these shapes and convert them all. Instead of filled, I converted them to outlines. You might have to come in here and adjust some of your shapes a little bit if you convert to outlines. Like these two lines were way too close. I don't even know if you need that inner line on the outline version. Let me look at this. Yeah, you know, on the outline version of this, I might just get rid of it. Maybe make this center one a little larger. Something like that. I think this one looks pretty good. And then this shape is just a little too close. So in this case, I would probably just move it. And you could measure all of this, of course, and make sure it's exactly like the right distance apart from one another. Might also be a good idea to use the same stroke that we used on all of these. You can come in here and say 1.5. Okay, this is all right. Feels a little thick maybe. I would want to come in here and just adjust some of this. These are maybe a little big now. And now I'm noticing that these icons, when I outline them, they are no longer inside our 2-pixel grid. So I would want to go up to my stroke and make sure the stroke is on the inside. Okay, stroke is on the inside. That's going to mess that one up. Okay, I'm going to have to separate this one. But you get the idea. You have essentially a set now that is a filled version and an outline version that you could use. Instead of exporting them here, I'm going to put them all on individual artboards over here. I'm going to click Document Setup at the top, and I'm going to edit artboards. I'm going to draw a 24 pixel artboard, and I'm going to duplicate it 6 times. All right, and I am going to drag each of these. I'm going to copy them actually. I'm going to drag this icon onto my artboard. I'm just going to make sure it's on the edge. And sorry, the last step you'd want to do on these outline icons is you'd want to select them all and say Object, Path, Outline, Stroke. So these are all outlined. Sorry, I skipped that step. Okay, turning my grid back on. And I'm just kind of loosely dragging these over. If I was really doing this, I'd really want to be much more exact. Just for demonstration purposes, dragging the icon with the grid and just putting them each on their own little artboard. Okay, remember you can turn your grid off at any point. But now I have a file that's starting to be set up more professional. I have artboards for each of these icons. I still have this artboard, which you may want to delete this at some point. So now we want to go name these individual artboards. You can go back to Document Setup, say Edit Artboards. And you can also say Window Artboards and make sure you see this little window open. So this allows you to then go in and name each of these. And this has a number associated with it. So this is number 2. If I go to number 2 artboard, I'm going to name this Camera. And let's name this one also Camera. But this is an outline icon. So I'm going to say Camera Outline. I'm going to do the same for all of these. Say Palette. This is really helpful for exporting. When you export, it's going to use the name of your artboards in your file name. Palette, outline, and last one, paintbrush. Okay, so now I have all of my artboards, and you can reorganize your artboards too, just so they're in order. Oh, and one of mine did not get named. Which one is this? I think it's this one. Yep, paintbrush. Okay. So I've got camera, camera outline, paintbrush, paintbrush outline, palette, palette outline. I'm going to turn my grid layer off so that's just clean icons right now. And one more check I always like to do, make sure we don't have any outlines in this design. So this one, I forgot to convert them to outlines. Okay, so on all these, you need to go to Object, Path, Outline, Stroke. Always make sure all of your strokes are outlined in your final designs. I think these look pretty good. And obviously there's a lot of little details here that I could fix if I have time, but for today's demonstration, I'm just gonna keep going. So the final step to making these finished icons is go to File, Save As. I'm gonna say Icon, Export, say Create, make a folder for these. I'm gonna save these as EPS files. I want them to stay in vector format. You could also do SVGs, that's a web format vector file. Let's do this for now. So we're gonna do this file type. I'm gonna say use artboards. And again, we're gonna export artboards 2 through 7. And I like to just type in a name here, so icon. And then it's gonna add that file name and that artboard name after the word icon. So let's click save, say okay, and let's go look at these icons. All right, so you can see the file name, icon, camera outline, icon, camera, EPS. I'm gonna open up a couple of these files in Illustrator so you can look at them. All right, and this is great. It actually kept the grid in here. So if we needed to turn the grid on, we can, or this is ready to be used in a project and you can change the color. So that's how you design icons using an icon grid in Adobe Illustrator. You can download these practice files and the icon grid that I used today in the description below. If you like this video, hit the thumbs up. Subscribe to Cry Studio for more Adobe Illustrator and graphic design tutorials. Thanks so much.